Welcome to Astrology, where you are now taking steps to becoming your rare, authentically mastered self using the language of the stars. My name is Brandon, and today we are going to be talking about Jupiter in Aries and Jupiter in the first house. So this video is going to be a little bit of a longer video, only because there's a lot more to talk about with Jupiter, naturally. So first of all, if you're new to my channel, hi, my name is Brandon. I do astrology stuff, if you couldn't tell by the context of what I'm just talking about. All my stuff is down below. This is going to be a very long series of all the different Jupiter signs, as well as everything in Aries, Taurus, Gemini, so on and so forth. So feel free to stick around as this goes through. So, in this video, there's going to be some resources down in the description box below. I'm going to talk about both Jupiter in Aries and Jupiter in the first house. If you have either of those placements in your birth chart, make sure to stay tuned, make sure to keep watching. And if you have either of those, look at the timestamps down below and click to which one you have, and you can watch that segment. In this video, I'm going to go over a couple other things. I'm going to go over just the natural significators of Jupiter and how Jupiter works, as well as obviously Jupiter in the first house, Jupiter in Aries, and those basic significators and different things that I've noticed in my studies that I think are important for people that have those placements to know. Now, I think that's all I really need to say, but the other thing is that if you don't know what your birth chart is, you don't know how to generate it, there is some links down below in the description box that you can check out that'll help you figure out what your placements are if you have Jupiter in Aries, or if you have Jupiter in the first house. So make sure to check down there if you need that. But without further ado, let's just get right into talking about Jupiter. So Jupiter is an energy that, if you don't know what it is, it looks like this. So that's Jupiter. And the way that Jupiter typically works, it's going to enlarge that area of life for you, enlarge those qualities, and really bless you in a lot of ways. It's going to expand the potential of what you see as possible as it relates to that energy, as it relates to that archetype, and both by planet, constellation, and house. So if Jupiter aspects another planet, it's going to enlarge that capacity of that planet. If it aspects, or if depending on what constellation it's in, it's going to enlarge that capacity for that archetype of that constellation. And then the area of life that's affected by the house is going to be enlarged wherever Jupiter sits in your chart. So it's important to know where Jupiter sits and what Jupiter is doing in your chart. If you are either a Pisces or Sagittarius rising, it's important for you to understand what Jupiter is doing in your chart, because Jupiter is your chart ruler. And anytime Jupiter makes any major aspects to your natal Jupiter, so by a Jupiter square, Jupiter opposition, or Jupiter return, all of those planetary energies are going to enhance what you're already doing. And so Jupiter energy is a lot more important for you to follow if you are a Sagittarius or Pisces rising. With that being said, too, it is important to understand what happens when Jupiter goes retrograde, because Jupiter is retrograde for a fair amount of time throughout the course of the year, because it does take a longer time in its retrograde period versus Mercury, where it's a couple of weeks that Mercury is retrograde, but Mercury retrogrades multiple times throughout the year. So with Jupiter retrograde, there is energies a little bit different within that, where Jupiter kind of allows you to really see the limits and also see the potential within yourself, because Jupiter retrograde, most retrograde planets are going to stifle that development of that specific energy or specific archetype. And because Jupiter has to do with your belief systems, with your morals, with your purpose, with your meaning, those things may be more difficult for you to grasp, or more difficult for you to piece together in a way that is a cohesive belief system. So there may be some sort of delays within the development of your belief system, but that does not mean that there's anything that's difficult or inherently bad about having a Jupiter retrograde, or any retrograde planet for that matter. So make sure you note that as well. There is way more information on retrogrades. If you are interested in that, let me know. I will be happy to make a video on just retrograde planetary energies, because there's a lot to be said on that I cannot fit into this short little intro here. But it's important to reference and know exactly where your Jupiter sits and what Jupiter is doing within your chart to just get a better idea of the bigger picture of what is going on. So make sure you note those things. Note where Jupiter's at. Note if you're a Sagittarius or Pisces rising. Note if Jupiter's retrograde. And understand that Jupiter has a lot of benefit, a lot of benefit to do with your chart. And if you have Jupiter in Aries or Jupiter in the first house, we're going to go over that today. But there is a lot of things that it naturally will expand. It will naturally give you luck in that area of life, because it's going to give you more hope, more optimism, more belief in that area, and it might enlarge the capabilities and the capacity for you to do and utilize whatever energy or whatever archetype is associated with your planetary placement of Jupiter. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about Jupiter and Aries next, and we'll just get right into it. So that's the next part for Jupiter and Aries. So Jupiter and Aries has an interesting energy about it in the sense that Jupiter is in a fire sign. Jupiter is in the first fire sign of all the fire signs, and whenever Jupiter is in a sign of fire, Jupiter expands what it touches, right? It expands the capacity for that particular energy, that particular archetype, that particular sort of way of movement. And with Aries, Aries is all about the actual starting of things, the actual movement, the actual initiation of yourself. And when you have Jupiter in Aries, this energy is almost like you want to just start things. You want to just keep going and figuring out who you are. I think it's interesting about this is that when Jupiter is in the sign of Aries, everyone believes in themselves so much more than they do any other time. Aries season, Aries energy is all about the self. It's all about the individual. It's all about what you can accomplish. It's all about your own needs, your own desires, and going after them as well and as quickly and as self-focused as you can. Because Jupiter will expand whatever constellation it's in, this is the constellation associated with your own initiation, your own ability to go out and believe in yourself and go after your desires, go after what you want, and be your own person. And because Aries rules the head, there is an aspect of this where there is a very literal headstrong way about you, where you are very much a person that is going to go after what you want, be very, very diligent, be very, very focused and individual, and lead in that way. And the Jupiter and Aries archetype is very, very beneficial for self-belief. The self-belief is boundless with this placement. Your belief in yourself and what you can accomplish and what you believe that you're capable of is so beyond anything else. And depending on the rest of your chart, obviously you want to look to Mars to see what Mars is doing, because if Jupiter is in Aries and Mars is, difficulty aspected, it's going to show some difficulties in developing your sense of belief. So Jupiter in Aries, for the most part, and this is also with Jupiter in the first house, has to do with understanding your identity through knowing what you're capable of and knowing your limits. It's not the same as Saturn in Aries or Saturn in the first house, because this is seeing the capacity and seeing the belief and seeing what you could do, the imagined potential of your life with the Jupiter in Aries. Now, this placement does have a way about it of maybe doing too much, right? Maybe overdoing it or over believing in yourself in a sense of just, oh, I know I can do it, I know I can do it, I know I can do it, and kind of just doing things very sporadically and maybe impulsively, because Aries is very impulsive. That is the energy of Aries. It literally rules your actual impulse, the impulses that you actually go towards, and how you navigate the world is through that Aries sort of archetype, that sort of initiatory sort of way about you. And so with Jupiter being in Aries, there is a strong self-belief. Obviously, I talked about that. There's an increase in luck throughout your life. So with this, obviously, just the more you figure out who you are, the more you know your identity, the more luck is going to follow you. The more you're going to feel that because you know who you are, the universe is going to give you more of who you are. That's why Jupiter in Aries is really, really beneficial, because Aries is all about the development of your identity. And the more you develop that as time goes on, the more Jupiter will expand that and give you more of what you say you are, essentially. This is Jupiter in a lot of the fire signs, but in Aries, it is more focused on that development of the identity in a way that Jupiter will give you more of that so that you can go and do more things. It's different in the other fire signs, Jupiter in Leo, Jupiter in Sagittarius, but Jupiter in Aries is a lot about you go out and do more things, and you have this resonance within yourself. You're like, oh, okay, I believe that I can do this because I've done X, Y, and Z, right? I've done these things, and it's almost like, because I've done these things, the universe will provide me with more things, showing me that I can do more, right? And it's almost like this snowballing effect that may happen with Jupiter in Aries, where you go out and you accomplish this thing, and then somehow now you have all these opportunities and doors opening for you as it relates to that specific thing. And so it's a really interesting energy to be in, because if you don't know your identity, if you don't know who you are, and that can be seen with a difficultly aspected Mars or difficultly aspected Venus or first house, and there's a development or a slower development of your identity, Jupiter in Aries is going to throw a bunch of different opportunities at you to develop that sense of identity, that sense of self-direction, that sense of initiation. So understand exactly who you are is very important. And having some sense of purpose with that too is also very important, because Jupiter rules purpose and meaning. And finding purpose and meaning in the movements you make and in your identity is really what's crucial to all Jupiter in Aries. With this, obviously, like some of the more common things about Jupiter in Aries is a very like long or loud or strong personality. Those are more of the common just basic sort of interpretations of this, but I didn't want to leave them out. Jupiter in Aries can be assertive almost too much if acted on, in the sense that you can almost just want to do too much. Just to prove that you have belief in yourself, or on the other end, you believe in yourself so much that you do too much, right? It's not really necessarily to prove yourself. That's more of a Saturnian thing, more of a push, like more of a resistance energy. This is more of a, I'm just going to do it because I believe in myself. I'm going to jump and I'm going to see where I fall because I trust myself. And there's a lot of self-trust that's developed in this, a lot of self-trust with Jupiter in Aries. There's a lot of wanting to accomplish many things in life, because of Aries being associated with the actions that you take in life. So there is a large importance for you to accomplish a lot in this life, and to have that be focused around your beliefs and understand the higher purpose for what you're doing is a lot of that. And it's not just accomplishing things for a sense of accomplishment's sake. It's for having some sense of purpose with it. And sometimes the development of that doesn't come till later, because it's Aries, right? It's going to take some time to develop its sense of identity. But it is something that when you have Jupiter in Aries, it's a very powerful energy that allows you to go throughout life and explore different aspects of what you could be, the potential of what you could be. Because Jupiter energy really talks about the potential, but the potential that you see as possible because other people have accomplished it. And now, because it's Jupiter in Aries, it's almost like you have this potential that you see within yourself, and you're trying to actualize that potential through experimentation of different things throughout your life and different sort of impulses. And it's a matter of following those impulses and understanding the meaning of those impulses is very important. And this is also the same, similar in the sense with Jupiter in the first house. And this is actually, that's more so Jupiter in the first house too. It's wanting to be seen as a leader too, and you obviously have natural leadership abilities. This is just most Aries energy, but with Jupiter in Aries, there's a lot of that, because Aries is the leader. It's the one that starts, the traditional zodiac, and it's the one that kind of trailblazes in its own way through knowing itself, through knowing what it wants to accomplish. And that makes you a very strong leader in that way. People want to follow you. I said this already, but it may be impulsive if Mars is difficultly aspected. So because Jupiter is in Aries, you want to look to Mars to see where this Jupiter energy is going, essentially, and what else is being affected by it. So if you have your Jupiter in Aries, but you have, let's say, your Mars in Scorpio, that's actually an interesting combination there. But if you have your Mars in Scorpio, for example, with Jupiter in Aries, the beliefs that you're looking for, the sense of identity that you're looking for are going to be through some sort of crisis, some sort of darker acceptance of your psyche in that way, and so it might flavor this Jupiter in Aries in a different sense. Whereas if you had like a Mars in Libra, for example, this is an interesting one, because it makes it for your Jupiter being in a very self-focused sign, and then it's reporting to this sign associated with other people. So there's a need to balance that Jupiterian belief in yourself with the actions of other people, or the energy of other people, or the sort of force of other people that's coming towards you, or that's kind of fighting against your own beliefs in that way. So there's a lot of different ways that this can play out. So it is important to look at what your Mars sign is doing in relation to this Jupiter in Aries, because that's where all of this is going to go to in that sense. Other things too, if you have Jupiter in Aries and you have your Mars in Sagittarius or in Pisces, those are going to be considered mutual reception, which I'm going to do a whole thing on mutual reception later. But it is something that I really, really love talking about, so I don't want to get into it this deeply in this video. But it is important to note that if you have that, it does support this energy a lot further. If you have your Jupiter in Aries and Mars in Sagittarius or Mars in Pisces, it definitely assists that energy there for you. The other things too, Jupiter in Aries, your beliefs create motivation, and beliefs can be self-belief or they can be religious or spiritual beliefs. So what you believe in becomes your fuel, essentially. That's really the best way for me to put it in that way, and I think that's a very simple way to put it as well. Whatever it is that you believe is possible for yourself, or the meaning of what you're doing on a higher level, religious or spiritual, that is what you will follow. That is what will be your guiding light, essentially, in a sense. And then there's a strong sense of self and a strong identity that is formed throughout a pretty explorative way. There may be some cultural things around the identity as well. This is more so seen with Jupiter in the first house than Jupiter in Aries, but there may be some cultural things with that. With Jupiter in Aries as well, there is some energy around it being more positive relationships with males and male figures in general, because Aries typically rules male energy. And so with Jupiter being in the sign of the male, there may be some male teachers that come in, male gurus, male philosophers, male just people that teach you, maybe more on the masculine side or more traditionally male, or those sorts of figures. So there may be something around that too to be explored potentially, because there is ways that can kind of be seen in the chart. With Jupiter in Aries, there is a need to connect to something higher in what you do. So wherever Jupiter sits as well, it definitely allows you to enjoy that constellation, the correlations to that constellation, which in this sense is yourself, and it's what you do, it's what you start, it's who you are. So there's a lot of enjoyment of the self, enjoyment of the identity, enjoyment of like expressing who you are. And it's not in the Leo way, it's in the Aries way. It's in the expressing who you are and finding out and exploring that process, which I think is so beautiful. It's not entirely in the same way as Leo or in Sagittarius. It's very much about, this is who I am, and I'm figuring out who I am, and I'm enjoying that process and kind of allowing the depth of myself to be shown to me, or the potential of myself rather to be shown to me through this explorative process, which I think is really, really beautiful with that placement. Another thing I said about here is you may overdo your actions, and that may harm people potentially. This is more of like a negative, obviously, correlation with this, because Aries does rule how you go after things, and it can also rule arguments, or it can rule sort of assertiveness in a sense, and there may be a negative sort of overabundance of assertiveness or anger, right? Jupiter in Aries can also have some interesting, similar to like preaching energy. It can have this very much preaching, sort of pushing your beliefs onto other people, because you know what worked for you and what is working for you, and you want other people to believe in that same path. But Jupiter and Aries have to understand that that's not the only path, is their path. Everyone has their own path, everyone has their own individual, and that's what Jupiter and Aries has to understand, because they have to see the other side, which is the Libra side, which is everyone else has their own battles they're fighting and their own paths that they have to go on, and no one is the same as you, which is both beautiful and both kind of saddening as well in that way. But there is a potential to have some almost angry sort of philosophical energy debates. This is more so seen with I would see this more with a Mars in Sagittarius, less so with Jupiter and Aries. But there is this sort of energy of fighting for your beliefs, fighting for what it is that you believe works for you and therefore will work for everyone else. And it might come across as very aggressive, and very just angry. Right? It can be a lot of that too. Jupiter in Aries wants to teach the native that they can do whatever they want, but it also is asking the native to not overdo it and focus on the other and how their actions may impact those around them and throughout their life. which is kind of what I've been saying most of this. It's very much to know exactly what it is that you're doing, because Aries energy is all about you and your choices that you make. And Jupiter is going to expand the capacity of those choices. It's going to give you a lot of choices. It's going to give you a lot of potential to go in a lot of different directions. And that's great. It's beautiful. It's phenomenal, actually. But it's a matter of choosing those directions and seeing which ones feel right, and knowing that it's part of the process of figuring out who you are, and understanding that there is actions that you take that will impact other people throughout your life, because it's not just you playing this game, although it is very much you in your own reality. There are other people that you do have an impact on throughout the course of this, and it is important to understand the purpose and meaning as you relate to the entirety of everything else as well. This is another thing I wrote here. Although this placement is extremely self-focused, it needs to understand that there is more people in the world besides them, and that they need to work to understand that their actions may affect others. That's what I just said. This placement is not the same as Saturn Aries, where there's a lack of belief in your own ability. Jupiter expands this place, so it needs to tap into its Saturnian side and learn how to tame their actions and not jump to take action so impulsively. So because Jupiter and Saturn typically work together in a way, it's important to know where your Saturn sign is placed as well. I'll be doing Saturn sign videos in its own time as well, but it is important to know what your Saturn energy is, because Jupiter and Aries can definitely overdo things, and they're probably one of the most prone, in my mind, of Jupiter signs to overdo things and to overextend themselves, or to push too hard, or to fight too hard for something that they believe in so deeply. So it's important to see what Saturn is doing, because Saturn is going to want to constrict that ability for you to go after what you want, or for you to really believe in yourself as fully as you can. So it's a very interesting dichotomy that tends to happen between Jupiter and Saturn, where there's a need to balance those energies. But for the most part, with this Jupiter and Aries, it is a beautiful energy. It is going to allow you to see all the potential of what you can be and who you can be, and follow that belief and follow the development of that belief as you go through it, which I think is really, really beautiful. And I applaud all of you Jupiter and Aries for coming in with that and seeing how vast your identity can become and how vast you can actually become in this life. And it's a beautiful placement to have for that reason. So follow your belief, follow yourself, trust your instinct, trust your own belief system and meaning and purpose that you're finding that is linked to you and your movement. It's such a personal placement when you have Jupiter in Aries. So I love it. So with that being said, in the Jupiter in Aries, we're going to move on to Jupiter in the first house. Okay. So Jupiter in the first house is a little bit different than Jupiter in Aries, because Jupiter in the first house doesn't have to be in the sign of Aries. So it can play out in a many different multitude of ways. So with Jupiter in the first house, a lot of the stuff I talked about with Jupiter and Aries is going to kind of apply, because a lot of what I spoke about in the previous portion was about this belief system that kind of navigates you and is what inspires you to become who you want to become, or move how you want to move. And whatever planets are in the first house, it's going to impact the way that you move into a new environment and what you choose to focus on. So with Jupiter in the first house, you are typically going to focus on the belief, the potential, the purpose, the meaning of whatever it is that you're doing, or whatever it is that you're being put into. So, for example, if you were to go to a convention, right, and you had Jupiter in your first house, you would likely see a bunch of potential opportunities, see a bunch of networking opportunities, or a bunch of new doorways that have opened for you if you went to this convention, a bunch of new friends, a bunch of new possibilities. There's a lot of that with Jupiter in the first house, where you're able to see all of what could be possible for you whenever you go into a new area. There is also a way with Jupiter in the first house, as I said, with meaning, where because the first house is how you move and what planetary energies you use to move through, there is a search for meaning in the things that you do and in the environments that you're put in and in how you're moving. So it's similar to Jupiter and Aries in that regard, because there is a need to utilize meaning and belief into your life and kind of incorporate that into your identity. But the difference between Jupiter and Aries, Jupiter in the first house, is Jupiter in the first house, this example, is going to be much more literal, because it's very much going to be focused on the way that you move. Whereas Jupiter in Aries, it might have Jupiter in Aries, but it might be, in the 12th house or in the 8th house, or in a more sort of harder to access energy. Whereas Jupiter in the first house, it's right there. People see it. You're going to be utilizing that energy, whether you want it or not, to navigate your world. And so looking for meaning and purpose is going to be part of your biggest lessons in this life. And Jupiter wants you to do that. It's important to look to what Jupiter is doing in your chart as well. Look to see where Sagittarius is. Look to see where Pisces is in your chart. As well as look to see, obviously, whatever planetary or whatever planet Jupiter is going to. So what I spoke to about with Jupiter in Aries is going to Mars. So you would look to Mars to see what Mars is doing in this example. So with Jupiter being in, for example, in Capricorn, you would look to see where Saturn is in your chart to see what's going on with that, and see what energies are being kind of played out in that way. If Jupiter's in, Gemini, you would go to look at Mercury and see what that's doing in your chart for a better idea of how this is playing out. So it's important to see what your Jupiter in the first house is doing, as well as kind of where the energy is being pushed towards and what kind of way it's kind of expressing itself. A couple of things I wrote about Jupiter in the first house. Simple weight gain, because the first house does rule the physical body, the physical sort of expression, the way people see you, and Jupiter expands that. It expands that, and it can be for better or for worse. Typically with Jupiter in the first house, it's more than likely a worse thing, depending upon different aspects and things, but most Jupiter first house people I've met don't really like their bodies because it's a little bit bigger than they had, that they would like it to be. And that might be because of an overabundance of energy, overabundance of just attachment of things, or whatever it may be. There's many different reasons for that to manifest and to come into your life. But most Jupiter in the first house people will experience some form of interesting relationship with their body, and you need to find a belief within why their body was formed the way that it was. And it can come from either weight gain, not entirely weight loss, because weight loss is more seen by Saturn in the first house, or like some other different sort of planetary energies and aspects, but Jupiter in the first house will likely expand the ability for the actual physical body in some way. With Jupiter, it also, and I didn't reference this in the first portion mainly because it's not relevant, but Jupiter always aspects the 5th and 9th house from itself, so it's going to aspect the natural 5th house and the natural 9th house, which is going to expand the creative expression and expand the actual beliefs. So it's going to aspect both the 5th house and 9th house, which are the other fire houses. So it's going to even more so exacerbate this expression of yourself, this identity, this sort of impulse that you're going to want to follow to figure out who you are. The individual may have a very beautiful life filled with growth in many ways. That's very much just general things on Jupiter in the first house. The life is naturally filled with just growth and opportunities, because you go into a room and you look for opportunities. You look for new ways to grow, and new potential, and new sort of ways that you could experience life and adventures. Essentially, it's really beautiful, honestly. When Jupiter is in the first house, there's a natural luck in the actions that you take. So the movements you take will naturally, if you're in alignment with your belief system, with your meaning, with your purpose, with yourself and your own intuition, and you trust that, Jupiter will provide you with more luck, provide you with more security, more abundance, more growth in that area. And so it's going to meet you that way, and it's going to say, hey, here's more stuff, here's more luck, here's more opportunity, here's more growth, right? As long as you keep going along that way and you understand what your beliefs are and your morals and your purpose and meaning for what you're doing, Jupiter is going to provide you with more of that, which is why they're very, very lucky. Once you develop a sense of belief system, that's going to be what you're going to use to navigate. You'll be fine. There may have been a very expensive or large birth, and early childhood may be filled with an abundance of self-belief and action. So with this, the first house also rules childbirth and actually you coming into life. And with Jupiter being in the first house, there may have been a very expensive birth. I see this more so with if Jupiter's in an earth sign in the first house. But it is possible for Jupiter being in the first house to just be a very extravagant way of coming in to the world, because you have to think about it. The first house is the way that you kind of enter this world, right? So this is a whole other thing. I don't really want to get into it, but there's people that, if you have, like a first house Uranus, for example, you come very suddenly. If you have a first house Mars, you might come by some sort of surgery, like C-section in that regard. Or Venus may have just been a very natural, like sort of really comforting, beautiful sort of environment that you came into. It's all about that sort of initial bringing into your environment, and that kind of flavors how you kind of see things in a way. So it's important to explore that. Obviously, if you can, ask your mother, or try and get that information as to how that birth was, because it may have been hinted with some sense of belief or purpose or meaning or spirituality in that way. There can be, even like with Jupiter in the first house, there can be some sort of like, when you're being born, like being surrounded by religious figures, in the sense of like the priest or different sort of religious teachers were there while your mother was delivering, or something along those lines, or different cultures, or whatever it may be. There may have been some interesting things with your mother and your actual birth that were related to that. And obviously there's a lot more to look into that, so don't quote me specifically on those things, but it is something that's really interesting. Jupiter in the first house is extremely protected throughout their life from some invisible force. They can simply rely on themselves for their own advancements. And depending upon the sign of Jupiter and the aspects, it shows that the beliefs, whether positive or negative, affect how the native goes through their life. So this is a lot to talk on here. So wherever Jupiter is, it's going to naturally protect that area. There's going to be a sense of belief that is brought into that area that when you find belief, find purpose, there will be some spiritual force that will allow that area to just kind of work for you. Obviously, you have to look to aspects and things to see if this is really going to be positive or not. But for the most part, it will allow you to have some sense of protection around what you're doing, around your path, whether you believe in that or not, which is interesting because Jupiter in the first house, this is what you're supposed to be understanding, is belief and how to do it and how to trust it. So this is a very interesting way for me to phrase this. And then obviously depending upon the sign and aspects of Jupiter, it shows that the beliefs, whether positive or negative, will affect the native and how you go through your life. So because Jupiter does show the bigger picture and kind of your purpose and meaning, and how you navigate the world through that lens of a higher knowledge or higher drive of things, whatever it is that you believe in, whether it's positive or negative, is going to be what is going to be in your reality. It's very much the law of attraction, that sort of law of assumption, those sorts of things are going to be a lot of what you're going to have to deal with in that sense, is understanding how your beliefs become a part of your reality, how what you believe is so seemingly and seamlessly actually in your reality, and so intrinsic in like the way that you move. It's very interesting because it's so important for you to follow your own beliefs. And it's the thing about Jupiter too, depending upon the sign of Jupiter will show you what beliefs are affecting you. So for example, if it was Jupiter in Aquarius in the first house, this is going to be affected by the beliefs of the collective, or the trends, and kind of following the beliefs that are trendy, or like, what kind of is popular right now, or just the group consensus of beliefs. You follow that. If Jupiter is in a really good sign like Sagittarius or Pisces, it's going to have a natural affinity to those sorts of religious or spiritual practices, and it's going to follow those things in a more Jupiterian, like naturally Jupiterian way, because they're Jupiter signs. If Jupiter was in Virgo or Capricorn or Taurus, like an earth sign, it's going to follow the beliefs that are proven, that are real, that are tangible, right? So it's important to understand those things with Jupiter as well, because it has a lot of the belief systems of Jupiter, depending upon your Jupiter sign, are going to be flavored by and affected by whatever sort of archetype or system is associated with that constellation. So if you have Jupiter in Aries, if you have Jupiter in Aries in the first house, which is intense, you'll have a very self-focused belief. The beliefs come from you with the Jupiter in Aries. So there's a lot of different things with Jupiter to explore in that way, the beliefs that are kind of brought to you through that sense. And obviously look at Jupiter aspects as well. Those are probably one of the most important things to look at. Oh my gosh, I wrote so much. Okay. So Jupiter in the first house, purpose drives you towards what you want to do. So the more you find purpose, the more you're going to be able to figure out what you want to do and where you want to go. A lot of this I already said, but meaning is put into your movement, and finding the meaning behind your life purpose is important. So knowing what your life purpose is and finding that purpose behind that is so crucial. And you have to look to the Jupiter sign and see aspects to see how this story is kind of playing out as well. Because there may be a Jupiter, squaring Mercury or Jupiter squaring Mars that it's gonna cause some inner tension and inner conflict within your own self on the development of your own beliefs, so that you can follow that inner guidance in a very you-focused way. You may overdo things within their lives to test the boundaries of how much you can accomplish. So that's a very Jupiterian first house thing. You may overdo things to see how far you can push those limits, how far you can actually go. That's why Jupiter in the first house and Jupiter in Aries can overdo things and push themselves too far to a sense of exhaustion. I see this more so with if Jupiter is in Aries and then Mars is in Scorpio, or Mars is in a really intense sign, it's going to over exacerbate that wanting to do things to believe, to show the world what you are capable of. But with Jupiter in the first house, you will almost do a lot of things to see, cast a very large net to see what you can do and what your potential is, and then decide what you want to do from there. Following some sort of spirituality or religion heavily throughout your life is important. That's just pretty much it. Spirituality and religion are important to Jupiter first house people. If they're not, it's important to look at what else is going on. But for the most part, it's going to follow them. Some sense of spiritual energy and religion and those things is prominent, and it's prominent in your path. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's prominent and it needs to be really, really known and put in you very, very seriously, but it's prominent in the way that you move in your path. It might just be something that subconsciously, that you just kind of know, you just know you're protected, you're safe, you don't need to pray every night, or you don't need to read the Bible every night, or read different sort of religious doctrine every night. You don't need to do that, because you know that you have a sense of natural faith and affinity and connection to something divine. You just know that in your sort of your skin, in your soul, right? So that's a lot of Jupiter in the first house with that as well. Two more things I have. So one thing about Jupiter in the first house is the ability to teach others is natural, and you may step into some sort of guru role quite easily as a Jupiter in the first house, because Jupiter rules teaching, and it's in your identity, it's in what people see from you. So naturally they're going to see you as someone that is able to teach them things, is wise beyond their years in the sense of spirituality, religion, whatever sort of thing that you're passionate about. So for example, if you had Jupiter in Virgo in the first house, you may be an engineering teacher, right? Or a very practical sort of guru in whatever it may be that you're passionate about, that's very physical, that's very tangible, that's very workable, with Jupiter in Virgo with this example in the first house. But you have to look to everything else going on in the chart. That's why Jupiter in the first house is such a large net of things, and that's why this video is obviously going to be long, because it's Jupiter. But it is something to look at to see what else is going on, because you can easily teach people with Jupiter in the first house. With any Jupiter placements, Jupiter Mercury placements, you can easily be a teacher. That could be something that you naturally fall into, and just naturally teaching people you may find a lot of joy in that, and you may actually find that may actually help you figure out your path a lot easier through teaching people and through showing people what you know, and kind of exchanging that sort of the exchanging of minds that kind of allow you to see a purpose through collaborating or speaking with another person. So it's really interesting when you bring in the whole aspect of teaching and learning with the Jupiter in the first house, because you can honestly learn so much through the concept of teaching as with this placement, and it will allow you to see your own potential in your mind of like, oh, I do understand these concepts, I do understand this thing, or I do know I have this potential. And then also learning from other people and becoming that lifelong student, as most Sagittarius placements are, or Jupiter placements are as well. There's a lot of energy around lifelong students with this, and it's a really beautiful placement. But you can also be a lifelong teacher. But if you're not if you're a teacher but not a lifelong student, there is an issue with that. So you want to make sure that you're constantly learning and expanding your belief system, or expanding your purpose and meaning, and understanding what purpose and meaning means to you, because that's what is very, very important. And if you are a Jupiter in first house watching this and astrology resonates with you, keep going in that direction, right? If you're Jupiter in the first house and astrology doesn't resonate with you, don't go in this direction. Explore other things. Explore different things that allow you to understand the scope of your belief system, the scope of what is possible with religion, spirituality, metaphysics, cosmological, sort of things. So definitely explore your belief system. Explore everything that sparks interest in you, that sparks meaning or purpose, or allows you to see some sort of larger divine connection. Look into that. That is what is really, really beautiful. So depending on the sign of Jupiter and the aspects, there is more to be said on the beliefs of the native, of course. And then looking at the 9th house as well as aspects to Mars, and then also to obviously the Jupiter's ruler, we'll get a fuller picture on what is going on for this entirety of this chart as it relates to belief systems. So there's a lot to be said on those things. But the thing is, with Jupiter in the first house, you have so much belief and so much to give and so much to do in this life. You really do. You have a lot to do. There's a lot to accomplish in this life with Jupiter in the first house, and it's a meaning of finding meaning in what you're doing, finding direction and a higher purpose in the things that you're doing in your life. Because if you have all these opportunities and you see the entire world as a buffet of opportunities, a buffet of different things that you can kind of collect from or explore or try, you have to eventually know what the purpose of all of this is. And if you don't find that, you're just going to keep eating and eating and eating and consuming and consuming and consuming. And that's why Jupiter in the first house, weight gain. Think about it, like that analogy of going in and seeing a buffet of different things. You just want more and more and more and more. But if you don't see, like, okay, I'm going to eat this and then I'm going to eat this, right? What I think about with this analogy with this whole buffet with Jupiter in the first house is the concept of like how sushi's eaten. Because sushi, it's almost like an art form, and it's almost like you choose to eat this roll and then you choose to cleanse your palate, or you choose to eat this thing, and it's in a very sequential order that allows you to experience the almost kind of like aphrodisiac, or that sort of experience and those sort of pleasures that you would have with going through and eating and choosing these different sort of opportunities. So you may have all these opportunities, all these different choices that you can make, but finding a sort of an end goal of what you want to get to, right? Allow yourself to make those choices and see the end goal and see what you want, and kind of explore those things and kind of make some sort of plan of the direction. Because if you don't, Jupiter in the first house is just going to go wild and go everywhere. So definitely have a sense of purpose and meaning and big picture of why you're doing what you're doing. But once you find that, you're golden. You are absolutely golden, and you will be able to shine and show the world all of what they are possible and potential of what they can do, because you also are going to be showing everybody around you the potential of human, like your own ability, and it's going to come across with other people where they're going to see, oh, if they can do it, I can do it, So definitely develop a sense of belief, and that will be your golden ticket into this life. So there's a lot more I could say on this. I'm trying to keep it very brief, but that is the Jupiter and the Aries portion there. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is a long video, but with this also, if you guys are interested in anything from me, video wise, reading wise, question wise, comment wise, everything, put it down below. I make videos quite often. I'll be putting these all out as quickly as I can. But yeah, so if you guys are interested in more from me, obviously reach down to me below. Check out the playlist down below as well, because I have videos down there too. I am also going to put down the playlist too. I have a Jupiter-Saturn series that I did like ages ago, like forever, where I talk about the Jupiter and Saturn and how they kind of work together depending upon what you had. So check that out too. I'll put that down there. It's a little older, so sorry. But feel free to comment down here if you're interested in those things or anything else. And I think that's enough of my rambling. Whenever I get in Jupiter energy, I get very rambly. So, but once again, I hope you guys enjoy this. I really enjoy this. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for now becoming your rare, authentically mastered self, using the language of the stars, you know, all of that stuff. And I will see you guys when I see you. Thank you so much once again. Love you. Stay grateful. Stay blessed. Talk to you soon.